Hi there, Perennial Pride listeners. Thanks for joining me as always. At this time of this recording, we're closing in on tax deadline time. So we're in April, spring's coming, got some rain, warmer weather, but the looming tax deadline is coming. So it's certainly causing stress to my tax professional friends who are in a frenzy just to get things done. And certainly for people that I know are trying to just get all their documents together, filing. So it's a little crazy time. It's also March Madness time, which is always fun. I know we're in April, but these things are connected in a lot of ways because I think about things. I'm a big sports fan. Anyone knows me personally. And, it's just excitement, certainly around the March Madness time. And I love to watch it. Young kids just, giving their hearts out to win basketball games. And it's just fun. But when you watch these things and you think about, how this relates to our financial lives, obviously, when we think about sports and the excitement is around offense, right? We want to score, we want to put up a lot of points. And that's the most exciting part. However, what is often missed is the defensive side, which, there's a mantra, defense wins championships. And again, I think there's some truth to it, but more importantly, I think there's about balance and coordination, alignment between them is so key. Yeah. Could you find cases where one side can dominate the other and really, lead to success? Sure. But by and large, I think most people would agree with the fact that having a balanced line offense and defense, whether it's in your sports team or even in your life and in your financial life, can be hugely beneficial. And how could they be coordinated in a way that they support each other and help drive each other to even greater levels of success? And so that's the topic I want to talk to about today because oftentimes when I talk to people and, obviously when you're listening to social media or listen to podcasts, others, there's more attention put on the offensive side. It's just more an interesting area. It's sexier, it's investments and growth and rates of return. And those are things that people get drawn to. And I get it. And it's an area that it's certainly very important for us to continue to build and grow our wealth over long periods of time for a whole host of reasons. It's certainly getting more difficult in this environment. So, especially inflation, all those things are making life a little bit more challenging for the vast majority of people. However, when I talk to a lot of folks, they really discount the defensive side, and that's what I want to cover off today. So, think about from the offensive side. What does that mean? And I think this is probably intuitive the most. It's investments, whether it's stocks, real estate, your business, all these things that we're trying to grow, which is absolutely key. Obviously, the thing that really drives our worlds to be able to let us eat, support our lives is income generation, more specifically positive cash flow, right? We need more money coming in than what we're spending so we can, live the lifestyle we want, but also, build for the future. And building equity in different assets is so key in a whole host of ways, right? That's really the core elements of the asset side, the offensive side, right? Which is so important. The defensive side, which I sort of position more of obviously protection is one component to it, and it's structure, how you're building that moat around your world. And that could mean a whole host of things. And a lot of it's tilted towards things that are expenses or things that are liabilities in our worlds. For instance, just how we started this podcast, taxes is a big expense that for the vast majority of people is going to amount to the biggest expense we all face in our lives. And that's not just what we spend in our taxes, or in my mind, cost us. They're losses, right? Because those dollars cease to be able to be invested and compound and grow over time. So there's massive opportunity loss associated with taxes. So having a proactive tax strategy can be hugely beneficial. Insurance in a whole host of ways, whether it be health insurance, disability, umbrella, you name it, life insurance. These are all areas that people want to spend the least amount with them. And I understand the philosophy around it and give it less attention. It's not the sexy side, and it's things we probably don't want to think about, but could be catastrophic if things don't work out in the way that we hoped. Liquidity is another one. We always say we have to be fully invested. I think the liquidity is such a huge component of our defensive side of the ball, because not only for emergencies, which we are often taught from a Dave Ramsey side of the fence, but more importantly, what happens when opportunity knocks? Do you have the liquidity to take advantage of those situations? And that is often overlooked because we are always just taught to just go on the offensive side. But what if you had liquidity in times of opportunity? You may be one of the few that could actually take advantage of it. We talked about risk management, broadly speaking, right? There's a lot of things that could cause some disruption in our lives that we ought to pay attention to mitigate that risk. And then the last thing I think fits into this bucket is liabilities and debt and the proper use of debt. And, we can go on the polar end and never, like a Dave Ramsey, never have debt. That's the worst thing. Don't feed the banks. And I agree that the improper use of debt is bad, certainly for consumer purposes, consumption. But what if you can use debt in a much more positive manner, right? Banks and finance, we finance things whether we pay ourselves or take on debt. So if you can strategically figure out how to use debt productively, that can spur significant growth on the offensive side. So it's not just about protection, it's how you're positioning your assets and thinking about the defense that may be something that could actually spur your offense. And really, when we think about the core problem and all of this, and again, this is about the sexiness of thinking about investments and pushing forward, like, FOMO and trying to, drive our assets because we do need to. And, the defensive side can be an afterthought, right? And a lot of decisions are made when we think about financial life with the idea of just growing wealth, and rarely do we really step back and really think about what could happen on a negative side, right? Are we protected well enough? Do we know even what's in our— I had a conversation really recently, like a disability policy at work, right? Everyone assumes you have it, but has anyone ever looked at it to say what you had, right? These are minor things, but could have catastrophic sort of impacts if they do occur, that will stop your ability to actually earn and grow assets on the offensive side. So as a result of that, you have things like that, like you have tax leaks, right? You're just, you know, inadvertently paying way more than you really do need to legally, but that's what happens. Or if your money's tied up, you have to maybe liquidate assets because you haven't prepared properly on the defensive side of the ball. Missed opportunities, right? There's things that, what's that? Luck is preparation meeting opportunity, right? Well, sometimes if you have the assets to be able, or liquidity, you can sort of deploy those at times of opportunity, which always come about. But, if you're tied up, then, those opportunities basically are going to float on by. And in a broader sense, I think a lot of people are living in the world of a fragile system. And this is what our financial lives are. It's a system. And so it's a matter of having that coordinated sort of approach to both your offense and defense that puts you in a power position when opportunities exist or are presented, but protect you from serious damage when unfortunately some things happen, which are— a lot of them are out of our control, right? And that's just the reality of life. We want to control everything, but the reality is there's very little that we fully control. And so people who are in power positions are going to be protected in those environments. And while things are going good, they can actually optimize all the pieces by designing a very robust system on how all these things work together. So let's go through some really specific examples of these things to really show you how these things can be coordinated. Often, and we do work with folks who, around trying to mitigate taxes, right? Nobody loves paying taxes. And it's one of those areas that, especially as your income grows, it gets worse, right? You go up the scale of tax rates, and that doesn't even account for, we're just talking about income taxes. Forget about payroll taxes, and you're getting at the federal, the income taxes on federal and state. You have your property taxes. I mean, if you really want to get depressed a little bit, you can really try to mathematically look at that. And for some people in high tax states like a California, New York, Connecticut, I mean, you're way over 50% of your income coming in is going out to taxation. So for us, taxes, I think you have to think about them a little bit differently. And something that it really resonated with me back in the day when I first sort of thought about, because I didn't like paying taxes myself, and you kind of say, well, how can I combat this? Well, When I first heard the concept of it's just the tax code is just a set of incentives that the government is putting forward. And if you just legally follow that and do what they want you to do, you can be legally able to reduce your tax bill, right? And they want us to do certain things. That's why they design these codes. And you just have to follow it, get the right consultation, understand what you're getting in, and follow the rules, and you can reduce it. So whether it be starting a business, owning real estate, right? Investing in energy like oil and gas, solar, these are types of things that could be used legally to offset your income. And it's not just a deduction where you defer taxes to a future date. It's actually reducing your taxes. That keeps more money in your pocket and frees up capital to you to continue to invest in other spots, right? Grow your business, invest in real estate, build up new skills that you can be more productive in your job. That is the biggest sole income provider for you. So these are all areas that, imagine how much is being lost in an annual basis that ceases to work for you in future years, and what that could earn for decades potentially, especially if you're younger. I mean, that is a massive bill that I don't think gets appreciated. And so taking the time and energy to not just plan for a given year, but think, how can I structure my financial life to be most tax efficient now and in the future, right? It isn't just in a given year. And in that case, understanding how the liability can actually turn into an asset and really fuel offense, and say, where am I going to deploy those dollars? Maybe in something that isn't taxed anymore in the future. How great would that be? Insurance. Now, nobody loves insurance until you need it, right? Just had a recent incident with a car. We had to pay. Thankfully, it got covered, and we had to pay our deductible, but we had that coverage, right? And so it helps us keep some of our wealth, right, and keep it deployed, right, because we had the proper insurance for auto. But what if you actually could create and utilize insurance tools that actually are real assets that can be deployed? Right. And one of the most misunderstood areas is around life insurance, right? Because deployed strategically, and most people are thinking about protection, and which is hugely key, especially when you're younger kids and sort of, protecting your ability to produce income. But as people migrate into future years, they don't feel like they need it. And that is understandable from a pure protection standpoint. I think what is often misunderstood is how it could be deployed as a useful financing option, asset as an asset, right? Because it's very tax advantaged. We're not going to go into the details around it too deep in here, but it's an asset that provides a protection, as you're building it, but has a built-in line of credit to be able to use as that source of financing for other things that you get to choose, right? And it could be borrowed against. And then some of the things around infinite banking, all these sorts of things, you look these things up, you'll get tons of opinions and thoughts around it. It's a scam, all these sorts of things. Listen, this is stuff that's been used for quite some time. It's way longer even in the stock market. Like, this is an asset that is misunderstood and has to be designed properly and understood. So, a lot of folks are using this asset to store money safely. That's asset and tax protected, but then borrowing against that asset to deploy in productive manners, right? And then so you kind of can have those sort of work in conjunction. Your protective arm that is there for liquidity and death protection, and in some cases disability is also included there, and asset protection now can be funneled to spur other investments in business, real estate, whatever, stocks, bond, you name it. It's your choice. And it's a financing source that is private, and it's not something you actually have to go apply for or see on your credit report. So these are all areas that, how those things are connected really is important for understand how you can take $1 that's, sitting there in doing different purposes, and then leveraging that asset for other needs around growth, right? Is not meant for growth. It helps spur the growth. And so the last piece of it is liabilities, right? Debt, right? And similar nature to life insurance, like, you have assets that maybe have illiquid pieces to them, like a home. Like, I often see a lot of people with having a massive equity in these days in their homes, that basically that equity earns 0%. It has no rate of return inherent to it. It's just sitting there waiting for you eventually to maybe liquidate this asset to go out get that money. But now it's just sitting idle, right? It's paying down. Some people are paying down their asset very quickly, for feel safer at night. They don't have a mortgage payment. However, then the money gets stuck in that asset that earns a zero rate of return. And, then you got to go get lines of credit, other things to use. But that could be an area to consider, at least having it as an emergency fund to if you need to pull and get assets, because if things happen and say you lose your job, you won't be able to get a line of credit because you have no income, right, to be able to support that debt. So getting ahead of things, and then who knows if you're comfortable enough with it. Some people use that line of credit against their home to invest in other things, right? And you have to be careful, just like any investment, like using debt very strategically and safely is key. But it could be a huge wealth builder over time, and that's what a lot of people who are have massive stock portfolios. Biggest you hear these things around like Elon Musk. I mean, he has massive Tesla stock. Well, he doesn't sell a lot of it. I know he has in some scenarios, but you know, s- selling creates tax liability. So you can borrow against it, keep the asset growing, and then use those dollars to live or invest other places. And that's that coordination that is really key to understand and comprehend. So, when we think about the broader framework of all of this, and just like anything in life, I think a lot of folks that I run across are imbalanced in a way that offense dictates things, right? They're chasing rates of return, taking a lot of risk, living in a inefficient world, and in a lot of cases having no liquidity. On the other side, it's not advantageous either if you're too conservative, right? You don't want to sway to that other side where you're not really investing or overly conservative, just putting stuff in the bank, or being super safe in only treasuries or whatever it is, and you're scared of what's happening, right? And you're not thinking long term of how these things will go up and down, and dealing with sort of the economic cycles, and not thinking long term. So you may be playing too defensively, right? And we know with inflation and other things, those are just headwinds that are causing people to have to build more and take on more risk, right? And so building a much more efficient capital structure, right, will help you keep more of your dollars moving, right, than trying to maximize everything out of what is a little left, or smaller amounts that are left. And so that's why you can't all the on both sides of it, I think, is causes challenges, but trying to figure out what's a very coordinated system between the two, and having the right balance that sort of suited for your situation, where you are in your life, and kind of what you're striving for. Because I think reality, there are some people that are taking on excessive risks for that are is unnecessary to support their life and their goals, right? For no purpose. It probably won't change their life if they add more money, but they're taking on significant risk. So these are areas that really to think through and sort of get comfortable for your situation. So hey, I'm taking on these risks for a purpose of where I'm trying to get to in life, in my goals to have the resources, the money, all those things support the life I want to lead, right? Not the other way around, which is unfortunately often the case. The last thing I would want to leave is kind of a quick summary of all these things, right? And we touch on tax savings, big time sort of thing, opportunity for folks who are excessively paying a lot of taxes, and just reallocating them into new buckets of assets, right? Investments, and getting those dollars to work for you as opposed to creating opportunity losses. Having ample liquidity, right? To access the capital in different forms. You have be in a power position to act when others cannot, right? Or they have to liquidate assets. And frankly, having the adequate risk protections in place, from liability to disability to life, all those sorts of things. What it also allows you to do when you've addressed those things, one, less worry about them, but two, then you focus your attention on what are areas I can actually grow and build my investment side of the fence without worrying about those things that might happen that might blow up my world, right? So the best offense in my mind is built on a strong defensive side of the ball. And unfortunately, in our segmented, siloed world of finances, it's difficult to have that coordination, because you may have a financial advisor that's say, "Oh, you always have to be invested. Just think long term, ride the waves." You get it, and but rarely do they get too deep into the defensive side, right? The risk mitigation. And on the people who are insurance focused will think on the other side of it, right? Just completely protect it. And you have a CPA that maybe is compliance focused, so they're not thinking about tax strategy. So this is why it's so key to have a team in place that can help you look at the fuller picture and how to maximize your capital broadly, right? Because you may have great experts in different areas of investments, insurance, and your estate plan, all those sorts of things, but rarely do they get coordinated together or discussed together, right? They're typically done in a very siloed nature, and that's what happens. And it puts people in a very difficult position to how to sort of manage that and understand if you're doing it as optimally as you can. And that's why having the right minds together to sort of work in collaboration is so key. So what I would leave you with is to ask yourself today, this year hopefully gives you a flyover of maybe helping you think differently around how you can maximize your capital and think of it from both sides of the coin of your wealth. Given what you're doing now financially, where is your focus? Is it only on defense? Is it only on too much on the offense? Or is there a good balance and maybe it just needs some tweaking? And are the decisions you're making financially accounting for both sides, right? Or is it just one-sided? Because we can easily get enamored with say, the investment side of things, but forget about, if we do these things, what is the tax implication of that, right? Because that could be draining from an asset and your ability to grow over time. So important to have those discussions and get ahead of them before you make those decisions. Because oftentimes I see decisions are made and now they're trying to retroactively figure out what can I do? Well, options are fewer, right? A big capital gain off the sale. Well, there are things you could have been doing before the sale, right? That could be structured in a way to mitigate taxes down the road legally. But now, because the transaction is done, a lot of options are eliminated, right? And this is why it's so important to get ahead of these things and ask the right people before you make a decision on them. And really examining both sides of the balance sheet and seeing, are they working together in concert, or are they really considered separate in your lives today? What are ways that they could be more coordinated? Because I think wealth, I don't think really to maximize it. Yes, you can play harder on one side versus the other, but I think that again creates the sort of one-sided nature of the world. And I think by designing and thoughtfully thinking through how they can connect and be maximized together is where I think there's massive opportunity to really make each of the dollars in your world do as many jobs as possible and work harder for you. Just like if they were employees, right? They're going to work as hard as possible for you, broadly speaking, and not do just one job. They can do many and allow you to live a life that you truly want because you have the ample resources to do it. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought and lets you think about where maybe there's some opportunities, and certainly have you sort of reach out to your advisors or even our team to even think through that with you could be a next step. So thanks for joining me on today's podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.